Hey guys, how are you doing? Hope you're good. Another little video today, and this time I have got my birthday cake here in front of me. Like you've seen the stenciling in a different video before. So now I'm going to do a little bit of writing on the cake board. I'm going to write the birthday lady's name, and I just thought it might be interesting to take a video of that and show you how I do that. It's a really simple method and quite foolproof. So I've got a little bit of royal icing that I've already made up, and this is just from packet royal icing, and it's silver spoon. So I've just put a few spoons of that in my bowl and added just a little bit of water in the same way that I mix up royal icing when I'm doing my stenciling. And I've put a little bit of super duper white in the mix as well, just to brighten up the writing a little bit. And I'm going for a pistachio green kind of colour, so I've got mint green from Sugar Flare, and I've just put the tiniest touch on the end of a cocktail stick. So I've got something which is quite thick. In fact, this is perfect stenciling consistency, but for writing I think I want a little bit thinner than this. It's trial and error really, the right icing consistency for writing, and it's whatever your personal preference is. I've just got a little tub of water. I'm going to dip the end of my knife in just to get a wee tiny bit extra water to thin down just a tiny bit my icing. If you have your icing the perfect consistency, you'll find when you are doing your writing, no little peaks will happen, and everything will, the ends of the icing will all flow back into itself, and you won't need to do any maintenance afterwards with the end of a little paintbrush. However, I like using icing that's slightly more thick than that because I find it gives a nicer shape. I like something to hold its shape really nicely, so what I end up with is little points at the start and end of each line that I do, and you'll see this, but I just sort that out with a damp paintbrush. It's really easy. So it depends what you like, depends your preference, and it depends your style. And there's no right or wrong, just whatever suits you. So this is the consistency that I quite like for writing. I would always test it first. So it's still quite stiff. I can get my palette knife through it, but it's not thick, it's nice and smooth. So I have my piping bag, and I have put a number 2 PME nozzle in the end. This is my favourite writing nozzle. You get thinner ones than this, and they can be nice for tiny details. Sometimes if I'm putting somebody's age, like happy 30th birthday for the TH, I'll use a number 1 nozzle, but number 2 from PME is my favourite in general. I find a number 1 nozzle harder to control, and the icing lines are more likely to break, for me anyway. So put my icing in my bag. Move it all down towards the bottom, and then I twirl the end at the top, and there we are. So just twirl it till the wee bit looks like it's coming out of the tip, and I always have on hand a piece of kitchen roll, a paintbrush, just a fine paintbrush, and a little tub of water. I also like to have a little airtight plastic tub on hand, and I just keep my piping bag full of icing in this while I'm doing other things, and it saves the icing drying out. So my birthday cake lady's name is Nicola, and I would like to write her name just about here on the cake board. I wouldn't normally sit a cake on a board as big as this. I quite like the board more to match the size of the cake, but I'm going to have decorations, little meringue kisses and macarons spilling over and off the cake and onto the cake board, so this is why I've left quite a bit of room, but Nicola's going to fit in at the front here. And what I always do is test on a bit of paper first, just to get the size right, so you know what size you're working with. If I move the cake back out the way and move my paper in, my technique for writing is quite a simple one, and my main rule is I don't write in a straight line. I think if I tried to write in a straight line with every letter the same height and with every letter matching its friends, then it would go wrong. So purposefully I always set out to do letters of different sizes that aren't in a straight line, but that look nice together, and I think you can't go wrong then. Each straight line, I start and begin and lift off. I don't try and do the whole letter. I do one straight line and I finish and I lift off. Because my icing's a little bit on the thick side, which is the way I like it, I dampen the end of my paintbrush and I wipe the water off in a bit of kitchen towel, and then I just touch the very top of any pointy bits, and they sink back into the main body of the icing. I have a spare piece of kitchen towel in hand just to squeeze a little bit out from the tip each time I start a new letter, so there's no hard icing coming out when I do it on my cake. On your practice, you don't even have to do everything and fill in every letter. It's just really for size. So you'll see here that I am not keeping anything in a straight line. I want it all a bit squint. I'm using my left hand because I'm left-handed, and just taking a wee bit extra time with the circles. What you can do as well with your damp paintbrush, if you find a circle is a little bit wobbly, dampen the end of your paintbrush again, wipe the excess off on a bit of kitchen towel, and you can go in and you can just touch up the bits that aren't quite right. You wouldn't want to spend all your time doing this because you'd be there a long time, but if there's any bits that you really don't like, you can just almost stroke the icing where it's joining onto your board there. So finish off, and the last two letters are easy because they're straight lines. Pulling the icing down, touching down and lifting off, and then whatever way it's comfier to just add to your letter. And if you've got a pointy bit, get your paintbrush, dampen it down, wipe the excess off in a bit of kitchen towel, and you can get rid of any of these wee points. Again, it's just a tester, it doesn't really matter, we don't really need to do that, but just to demonstrate the technique. I'll have my A tucked in to my L there. Even each side, I don't mind if they're different lengths. Alright, so that basically gives me an idea of size, and we can move the cake in and write on the actual cake. So what I can do is line up my tester roughly where I want the name to go, so that I know where I'm starting and I'm finishing. And this is useful if you are putting writing in a certain place and you don't want to run out of room. You can just keep an eye on what you're doing and see that it matches the tester you've done, so that you're not going to be too much bigger or too much smaller if you're spreading out to a certain space. Really, in this case, because I've got a great big clear board, it doesn't really matter at all. I don't really mind if my writing's going to end up a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So I make sure I squeeze a little bit of icing out onto some kitchen roll to clear the end of the nozzle and make sure there isn't any hard bits before I start writing. And I'm kind of just going for a midway distance between the edge of the board and the cake, and we'll go for the N. So what I'm doing is I'm squeezing with my left hand, but I'm supporting with my right, so I'm not going to be wobbly. So I'm leaning on my right hand with my left. Stop and lift up. I'm going to move my tester out of the way. I might bring it back in just to check sizes every now and again. Supporting with my right hand, so my left hand isn't wobbling about in the air, it's leaning on something, and even my right hand is lying on the table. So everything's steady. I have very wobbly hands. So I'm just pulling the icing really. Pull the icing to where it wants to go. I try not to push. Sometimes you can't avoid pushing if you're doing circles, but pulling is always better. Don't pull though, or you'll find you'll break your icing. So here's a lovely wee point here that we can get rid of. Paintbrush and water. Tap the excess off. Wipe the paintbrush on your kitchen roll. It doesn't want to be wet. Everything will just end up messy, but it wants to be damp. Then just touch the tip and everything melts back into the other icing that's on the board already. If my icing was a little bit thinner consistency, I wouldn't have to do this, but like I said already, I quite like this consistency because I find the lines look neater and they stand up more from the board rather than looking as if they're melting into the board. So continue, squeezing a wee bit out onto my kitchen roll, supporting my hand and in with the next letter. So I do quite like names which have got no round letters in them. Straight is good. And every time there's a wee point, I would just take it off. So I'm trying not to keep a straight line on purpose. Up and round with the C. Dip my brush in the water, take the excess off. Clean the tip again. And with the O. And I don't mind even if my letters are different sizes. You see where I'm pushing the icing round, it looks a wee bit more wobbly. I'm going to go in and sort that with my paintbrush. Dampen your brush, wipe the excess on a bit of kitchen roll so that there's no water on it, it's just damp, and I'm going to just go into the edges and just stroking the edges. You can actually move the icing a little bit. into the L, squeeze a bit out the tip of the nozzle, onto the kitchen roll. And I'm just going to check size on my tester. A little bit bigger but not too bad. And with a round board, I tend to work from the cake to the board, so everything would be straight between the cake and the board, no matter what letter I'm doing. And a little A tucked into the L. I quite like tucking letters into each other. If there's opportunity to do that, a nice one is in Happy Birthday, the T and the H tuck nicely into each other. So I've got all my little points there. I'm wetting my paintbrush, taking the excess water off, wiping it off on a piece of kitchen towel and just touching the points to get rid of them. Right, now this would be okay just to leave that as it is. It looks fine like that, it's quite nice and neat. But what I like to do is go back to the beginning again and just do a little accent, a little dot everywhere a straight line ends or everywhere a curved line ends. And I just think this is a nice finishing touch. And also if you've got any messy ends or any lines that are a wee bit too long or a wee bit too short, you can go back and disguise that. So you'll need your paintbrush for this because you will end up with wee pointy bits. And I'm just going in with little blobs. And we'll do a few at a time. Each time a straight line ends. I'll just do one at the bottom of the eye. Dampen my paintbrush, take the excess water off, wipe it on some kitchen towel and sort out these points, just touch them. And you end up with nice little round petals instead of something with a little sticky uppy bit on it. At the top of the eye, I'm going to go for the little hat flying away in the wind like we used to say in school, so I'm not going to put the dot on the top of the line, I'm going to put it in the air above. Get rid of the points. And sometimes on an O, I like to just put one in for a little accent. Pat down every few points at a time, because if you were to do all the letters then go back to the beginning, you would find your first set of dots had started to dry and you wouldn't get such a neat result. So just a few at a time. Last few. I wouldn't bother putting any in where my little crossbar is on my A. I'd just leave it at the top and bottom. Last few points. And that's us. So that is us. Easy and quick royal icing piping for your cakes. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you the next time. Bye for now.